a young woman stands at the altar of Berlin's most magnificent cathedral, diamonds cascading from her tiara like frozen starlight. Around her, the crowned heads of Europe gather in their finest regalia, kings, queens, emperors and empresses from every corner of the continent. The date is May 24th, 1913. This is the wedding of the century, and she is its radiant centerpiece. Her name is Princess Victoria Louise of Prussia, the only daughter of Kaiser Wilhelm II, and on this golden afternoon, she embodies everything the old world represents: power, privilege, and the unshakable belief that some things are eternal. But here's what no one in that glittering assembly could have imagined. This magnificent celebration, this last great gathering of European royalty, was actually a farewell. Within 14 months, their world would be consumed by the most devastating war in human history. And this young bride, born into the very heart of imperial power, would watch everything she knew crumble to dust. Today, we unlock the extraordinary story of the last imperial princess of Germany. A woman who was meant to unite empires through marriage, but instead became a bridge between centuries. Who lost a throne but gained something far more precious: the strength to reinvent herself when the world demanded it. This is the story of Victoria Louise, the princess who was born to rule, until history swept it all away. The Kaiser's beloved daughter. When Victoria Louise Adelaide Matilda Charlotte was born on September 13, 1892, at the Marble Palace in Potsdam, her arrival was greeted with pure joy. After 6 sons, Kaiser Wilhelm II and Empress Augusta Victoria finally had their daughter. The Empress wrote in her diary, "After 6 sons, God has given us our 7th child, a small but very strong little daughter." But Victoria Louise wasn't just another royal child. From her earliest moments, she occupied a unique position in one of Europe's most formidable families. While her 6 brothers were subjected to their father's notoriously harsh military discipline, Victoria Louise became the Kaiser's clear favorite. Her eldest brother would later observe that she was the only one of us who succeeded in gaining a snug place in their father's heart. This favoritism wasn't mere sentiment, it was transformative. Her English governess noted how the usually stern, warlike emperor would unbend and become playful when his daughter was near. Victoria Louise could make mistakes without being scolded, could laugh freely, could call him Papa in letters, small rebellions that amused rather than angered him. What no one realized then was that this emotional flexibility, this freedom from the rigid military expectations placed on her brothers, was preparing her for something extraordinary. While they were being groomed for a world that would soon vanish, she was developing the adaptability that would become her greatest strength. Growing up in the glittering court of Imperial Germany, Victoria Louise was surrounded by unimaginable luxury. She studied languages, literature, and the arts. She received music instruction from concert pianist Sandra Drucker. But more importantly, she absorbed her father's ideas about politics, loyalty, and monarchy, becoming his intellectual companion in ways her brothers never could. Yet, even as she basked in imperial privilege, the seeds of change were already being sown. Across Europe, tensions were building. The old certainties were beginning to crack. But in the golden bubble of the German court, such concerns seemed impossibly distant. Victoria Louise was being prepared for a very specific destiny: to serve as a diplomatic bridge through marriage, to unite rival houses and strengthen the empire through strategic alliance. It was a role she would fulfill brilliantly, but not at all in the way anyone expected. A marriage to heal old wounds. The story of Victoria Louise's marriage reads like a fairy tale, but it's also a masterclass in royal diplomacy. In 1912, Prince Ernest Augustus of Hanover came to the Berlin court to thank Kaiser Wilhelm II for a courtesy shown to his family. During this visit, he met Victoria Louise, and the attraction was immediate and mutual. But this wasn't just a love story, it was a political earthquake. Ernest Augustus was heir to the Kingdom of Hanover, which Prussia had annexed after the 1866 Austro-Prussian War. For nearly 50 years, the houses of Hohenzollern and Hanover had been bitter enemies. Any marriage between Victoria Louise and Ernest Augustus would need to overcome decades of animosity. The negotiations were delicate and complex. The Prussian crown prince initially opposed the match, demanding that Ernest Augustus renounce his claims to Hanover entirely. But Kaiser Wilhelm II saw a different opportunity, the chance to heal an old wound and strengthen German unity. A compromise was reached. Ernest Augustus would receive the smaller Duchy of Brunswick, and in exchange, the Hanoverian claims would be set aside. The engagement was announced in February 1913, and immediately the world took notice. Kaiser Wilhelm II spared no expense for his daughter's wedding. The ceremony on May 24, 1913, became the largest gathering of reigning monarchs in Germany since unification. King George V and Queen Mary of Britain attended. Tsar Nicholas II of Russia was there. Nearly every European royal house sent representatives. The guest list read like a directory of power. 1,200 guests, including the most influential figures on the continent. The gifts were spectacular. Tiaras from queens, necklaces from emperors, a diadem that once belonged to Empress Josephine. Victoria Louise wore a stunning gown and the Princess of Prussia crown of large diamonds, looking every inch the imperial bride. But here's the haunting irony. This wedding, intended to herald a new era of peace and cooperation, was actually the final gathering before catastrophe. Just 14 months later, these same monarchs would be enemies in the Great War. Many would lose their crowns forever. The Tsar would be executed. The Kaiser would flee into exile. Victoria Louise's wedding wasn't just the social event of the decade. It was the last great moment of the monarchical age in Europe. A final display of ceremony before the storm that would change everything. When empires fall. For the first few years of her marriage, Victoria Louise lived the life she had been born for. As Duchess of Brunswick, she performed royal duties, supported charitable causes, and seemed destined for a long, prosperous reign alongside her husband. The future stretched ahead, golden and secure. But by November 1918, that future was crumbling with terrifying speed. The Great War had been raging for 4 years, and Germany was collapsing. Revolutionary ferment swept through the country as military losses, food shortages, and civil unrest eroded public trust in the monarchy. Anti-royalist sentiment spread like wildfire. Revolution was no longer unthinkable, it was inevitable. Victoria Louise's personal ordeal during this period was particularly dramatic. As revolutionary forces stormed palaces across Germany, she lay seriously ill with Spanish flu, the deadly pandemic that was claiming millions of lives worldwide. While she fought for her life, her world was literally falling apart around her. On November 8, 1918, her husband Ernest Augustus was forced to abdicate his throne as Duke of Brunswick. Revolutionary forces stormed their palace while Victoria Louise was still recovering from her illness. Within days, her father, Kaiser Wilhelm II, had fled to exile in the Netherlands, ending the German Empire and the centuries-old Hohenzollern dynasty. In the span of 1 week, Victoria Louise had lost everything: her titles, her home, her security, and her entire way of life. The woman who had been born to rule was suddenly nobody, just another refugee from a vanished world. The parallel with her Russian cousins was chilling. The Romanov family had been executed by the Bolsheviks just months earlier. The same revolutionary fervor that had destroyed the Russian imperial family was now sweeping through Germany, targeting all remnants of the old monarchical order. Victoria Louise and her family were forced to flee immediately. They escaped to Austria, seeking refuge with Ernest Augustus's parents. The contrast with their previous life of luxury and security could not have been starker. The princess who had once danced with kings was now running for her life. The price of revolution. But if the collapse of the monarchy was devastating, the personal tragedies that followed were even more heartbreaking. The fall of the German Empire brought not just political upheaval, but profound human suffering to Victoria Louise's family. The first, and perhaps most devastating blow, was the suicide of her youngest brother, Prince Joachim, on July 18, 1920. Joachim had been particularly unable to cope with the new reality of life without titles, position, or prospects. Following the German Revolution, he had been stripped of all his imperial status and was forced to live as a common citizen. His marriage had also collapsed, adding personal humiliation to his political disappointment. Unable to accept his reduced circumstances, Joachim shot himself at age 29. Kaiser Wilhelm II's reaction revealed the emotional strain the family was under. Rather than showing grief, Wilhelm reportedly responded with fury, commenting that he was outraged, that the oaf should have done this too, to us. The tragedy proved too much for Victoria Louise's mother, Empress Augusta Victoria. She had been in declining health since the abdication, and the shock of Joachim's suicide, combined with the stress of exile, proved fatal. She died on April 11, 1921, essentially of what contemporaries called a broken heart. Then came another shock. Just over a year after his wife's death, Kaiser Wilhelm II remarried. His new bride was Princess Hermine Reuss of Greiss, 34 years old to Wilhelm's 63. Victoria Louise and several other family members viewed this remarriage as a betrayal of their mother's memory and refused to attend the ceremony. In the span of 3 years, Victoria Louise had lost her throne, her brother, her mother, and her relationship with her father. The family bonds that had once seemed unbreakable were severed. The world she had known was not just politically dead, it was emotionally shattered. Walking the tightrope. But here's where Victoria Louise's story becomes truly remarkable. Rather than succumb to bitterness or despair, she chose to reinvent herself. The woman who had been born to rule discovered she had been born for something even more challenging: survival. The 1920s and 1930s were a time of careful navigation. Victoria Louise and Ernest Augustus had no political role, but they still held attention. Their names continue to appear in the press. In the absence of a throne, they became symbols, visible reminders of the imperial era for those who remained nostalgic for the monarchy. Victoria Louise walked a delicate line. She wasn't a political figure, but she wasn't invisible either. Her public appearances were carefully managed. Ceremonies, charity events, cultural outings, always framed as private, never as challenges to the Republic. When the Nazi era arrived, the situation became even more complex. Victoria Louise's family found themselves in the uncomfortable position of former royals trying to survive under a regime that had little use for the old aristocracy. Her husband, Ernest Augustus, never officially joined the Nazi Party, but he maintained contact with several high-ranking officials, hoping that cooperation might preserve the family's social position. Victoria Louise herself avoided the political spotlight entirely. She focused on her family and made no public statements regarding the new government. It was a strategy of careful neutrality, neither endorsing the regime nor resisting it openly. The family's survival during World War II demonstrated the enduring power of royal connections. As Soviet forces approached their residence at Blankenberg Castle in 1945, Victoria Louise and her family faced the prospect of falling under communist control. However, through royal connections with the British monarchy, Victoria Louise was a second cousin of King George VI. A discreet operation was arranged. British forces arrived just days before the area was to be handed over to the Soviet Union. Under orders from King George VI, British Army trucks transported the entire family to safety in the British-occupied zone. This dramatic rescue showed that even in the modern era, the old networks of royal kinship retained significant operational power. From princess to chronicler. After World War II, Victoria Louise faced her greatest transformation yet. Following her husband's death in 1953, she gradually reinvented herself from a displaced royal into a respected cultural figure and author. Rather than fade into obscurity, she chose to become the keeper of historical memory. In 1965, she published her autobiography, Ein Leben als Tochter des Kaisers, Life as Daughter of the Emperor. This was followed by several other works, including biographies of her mother and sister-in-law. These memoirs were more than just personal recollections. They were acts of historical preservation. Victoria Louise understood that she was one of the last living links to a vanished world, and she took that responsibility seriously. Her books provided invaluable insights into the inner workings of European royalty during one of history's most tumultuous periods. But perhaps more importantly, they showed how someone could transform loss into purpose. The woman who had lost a throne found a new role as a cultural chronicler, ensuring that the stories of her era would not be forgotten. Victoria Louise's longevity was itself remarkable. She lived to be 88 years old, dying on December 11, 1980. She had outlived all 6 of her brothers, making her the last surviving child of Kaiser Wilhelm II. She witnessed 2 world wars, the Russian Revolution, the rise and fall of Nazi Germany, the establishment of Communist East Germany, and the beginning of the Federal Republic of West Germany. Few individuals in history have experienced such dramatic political and social transformation. But Victoria Louise didn't just witness these changes. She adapted to them, survived them, and ultimately transcended them. The crown she never wore. Through her daughter Frederica, who became Queen of Greece, Victoria Louise's influence extended well into the modern era of European constitutional monarchy. Her great-grandson, Felipe VI, is the current King of Spain. Her legacy lives on in the royal houses of Europe, a testament to her role as a bridge between the old world and the new. But perhaps Victoria Louise's greatest achievement was more personal than political. She proved that identity doesn't have to be defined by circumstances, that who we are is not determined by what happens to us, but by how we choose to respond. Born into absolute privilege, she learned to live as a private citizen. Raised to be a diplomatic bridge between empires, she became a human bridge between centuries. Expected to unite kingdoms through marriage, she instead united past and future through memory and storytelling. The princess who was born to rule discovered something more valuable than any crown: the power to reinvent herself when the world demanded it. She showed us that true nobility isn't about titles or tiaras. It's about grace under pressure, dignity in defeat, and the courage to begin again when everything you've known disappears. Victoria Louise's story reminds us that even in our darkest moments, when it feels like everything we've built is crumbling around us, we have a choice. We can cling to what was, or we can embrace what might be. We can mourn the past, or we can write the future. She was born to rule an empire that vanished. Instead, she ruled her own destiny, and that perhaps was the greatest victory of all. What challenges in your own life have forced you to reinvent yourself? What losses have ultimately led to unexpected discoveries about your own strength? Victoria Louise's remarkable journey shows us that sometimes our greatest defeats can become our most profound victories. If this story of resilience and reinvention moved you, please give this video a like and subscribe to our channel. There are so many more extraordinary women throughout history whose stories deserve to be told. Stories of courage, adaptation, and the unbreakable human spirit. Join us as we continue to uncover these hidden treasures of the past.